Let everything grow soft and warm around you now. Let the sounds of the day drift away like petals on a gentle current. Tonight, we walk into the oldest kind of richness. Not gold. Something older than gold. We walk into the field at the height of summer, when everything the earth has been working toward all year arrives at once. There is a word, prosperity, that has been made to mean something smaller than it is. Made to mean money, mostly. The accumulation of things. The number in the ledger at the end of a good year. But the Norse people, who lived close enough to the land to know exactly what prosperity meant in practice, knew it differently. They knew it as the year when the rains came at the right time. When the sun arrived without lingering too long in any one mood. When the grain grew tall and full and the livestock were healthy and the fishing boats returned with nets heavy enough to bend the hull. When the forest offered what the forest offers in good years, mushrooms and berries and game and the specific quality of deep shade on a hot afternoon. When the village was warm and fed and the families around the fire at the end of the day had something to show for what they had done. This specific, lived, sensory reality was what the Norse people meant by prosperity. And it was this that Freyr gave. Not metaphorically, literally. The warmth in the soil that made seeds germinate. The quality of the sunlight in the long northern summer that pushed the crops to their fullness in the brief season available to them. The peace between settlements that allowed the harvest to happen without interruption. His name was Freyr. And this is his story. Before Freyr's story in Asgard, before the great events that would make him one of the most beloved of the Norse gods, there was the place he came from. Vanaheim, one of the 9 realms and one of the less described in the sources that survived, as though some places are more felt than told. What we know of Vanaheim comes through those who came from it. And what they carried told you everything about what they had left behind. The Vanir were an older tradition than the Asir in some sense. Or at least a different one. Where the Asir organized themselves around walls and oaths and the structured hierarchy of a warrior culture, the Vanir moved in the rhythms of the natural world. They did not build to keep things out. They moved with what moved. The Vanir understood the earth in the specific way of people who have paid complete attention to it for a very long time. They knew the seasons from the inside, not as calendar markings but as lived realities, each one with its specific quality, its specific demands, its specific gifts. They understood the connection between the health of the soil and the health of the community, between the quality of the rainfall and the quality of the year, between the peace of the land and the peace of the people who lived on it. From Vanaheim came the understanding that everything is connected, that what you do to the field does to you, that abundance is not manufactured, it is cultivated, grown, tended, received. This understanding was Freyr's birthright. His father was Njrr, god of the sea and winds, the one who sent the favorable wind and calmed the waves for the fishing boats, the one whose blessing meant full nets and safe returns. Njrr was warm in the way of the sea in its best moods, the way the ocean is warm in late summer, when it has been holding sunlight for months and releases it slowly into the evening air. He understood provision in its most elemental form. The sea provides when approached with respect. It gives what it gives in its own time, cannot be hurried, cannot be tricked, can only be understood, and when it is understood, it gives enormously. Freyr carried this from his father. The understanding that abundance is not conquered but invited. That the field does not give because you are strong. It gives because you have been patient and attentive and have given it what it needs in the right season. And then there was Freyja, his twin, the one who had been his companion from the very beginning of his existence, before Asgard, before the war between the traditions, before any of the events that would define their place in the Norse cosmos. She was the goddess of love and beauty and the ancient magic of fate. He was the god of sunshine and prosperity and the harvest's joy. They were different expressions of the same essential Vanir understanding. She saw the beauty in all things. He brought the conditions that made beautiful things possible. She perceived value everywhere. He created the abundance that made value concrete. Together, they were the living world in its fullest aspect. The beauty and the richness, the love and the flourishing. Freyr and Freya, inseparable in the old tradition, both carrying Vanaheim's deepest understanding into a wider world. The conflict between the Asir and the Vanir is one of the most interesting events in Norse mythology because of how it resolved. Two great traditions of the divine, the organized wall-building, oath-keeping Asir of Asgard, and the nature-deep, abundance-giving, magic-practicing Vanir of Vanaheim, found themselves in conflict. The sources vary on the exact nature and causes, but what every version agrees on is the resolution. Not conquest, exchange. The most valued members of each tradition would cross to the other, would go and live there, would bring their particular qualities and their deep knowledge, would become part of what had been a different culture and enrich it from the inside. The Asir sent Mimir and Honir. The Vanir sent Njrr and his children, Freyr and Freya. This is not a solution that many traditions would have arrived at. It required both sides to believe that what they had to give was real and what the other had to give was real too. That the warrior culture and the nature culture were not enemies but complements. That a world with only one would be impoverished. Freyr traveled to Asgard carrying everything Vanaheim had given him. And what he gave Asgard, over the long years that followed, changed it in ways that could not have happened without him. When Freyr was young, still in the early years of his life before any of the great events, he was given a gift. Álfheimr, the realm of the light elves. Given as a tooth gift, the Old Norse tradition of honoring a child's first tooth, the moment when the child begins to engage with the world in its most fundamental physical way, by receiving a gift of significance. The realm was given to him as a tooth gift because it was the most natural thing. The same way you give a child who loves water a place near the sea. The same way you give a child who loves growing things a garden to tend. Freyr was the god of the living world and its abundance. And Álfheimr was the realm that the living world ran through most freely. The light elves were not elves in the diminutive fantasy sense. They were ancient and powerful beings, deeply connected to the forces that moved through growing things. The force that moved the sap upward in spring. The force that turned the flower toward the sun. The force that drove the root deeper in search of water. The light elves were the intelligence of the living world. Not separate from it, the living world knowing itself. And Álfheimr was their home, a realm of radiant quality, not blinding light, not the dramatic light of things that announce themselves, but the soft, consistent, entirely reliable light of a good summer day, the light that makes things grow. Freyr arrived in Álfheimr and found exactly what had always been his. He moved through the light elves' world with the ease of recognition. Not discovery. Recognition. The specific feeling of arriving somewhere you have always been. The light elves moved through Álfheimr with the quality of something that has been in the same place long enough to become part of it. They knew every tree in their forests, not in the way of an inventory or a map, in the way of beings who had grown up beside these trees, who had watched them through their seasons for longer than any human story could reach. They knew the specific way the old oak at the forest's western edge sounded in the wind, not like the birches nearby, which were lighter and moved more readily, but with a deeper, slower creak that came from the weight of years in the wood. They knew where the deer came to drink in the morning and where they slept in the afternoon. They knew the specific quality of the light on the forest floor in each season. In spring, filtered through new leaves that were not yet full-sized, a green-gold brightness. In summer, the deep shade of full canopy, with shafts of direct light finding the gaps. In autumn, the amber and red of turning leaves making the whole forest glow as though lit from within. In winter, the gray-white of the bare canopy letting the sky be more present than it was in the leafy months. Freyr learned from them. Not the way you learn from a teacher who knows something you do not. The way you learn from the world when you pay complete attention to it. He sat with the light elves in the long evenings, after the work of the realm was done, and he listened. They spoke of the forest's history, the storms that had felled the giants, the droughts that had tested the deep-rooted, the floods that had redistributed the soil in ways that changed everything that came after. They spoke of the specific qualities of different soils, which held water and which released it, which warmed quickly in spring and which stayed cold too long. They spoke of the relationship between the trees and the creatures that lived among them. How the old oaks supported more kinds of life than the young trees. How the dead trees were as important as the living ones for the richness they created. Freyr absorbed all of this and carried it into everything he did. In Álfheimr, Freyr came to understand something about abundance that he would carry for the whole of his life. Abundance is not a quantity. It is a quality of relationship. The field is abundant when the relationship between the soil and the roots and the water and the sun and the farmer is right. Not when any single element is maximized at the expense of the others. The field that receives too much rain drowns. The field that receives too much sun parches. The field that is worked too hard becomes exhausted. Abundance emerges from balance, from the specific harmony of all the elements in their right proportions. The light elves understood this deeply. They did not take from the forest more than the forest could give without diminishment. They knew the difference between what was available and what was sustainable. They pruned in the way of people who understood that the pruned tree grows stronger. They harvested in the way of people who understood that the unharvested tree becomes crowded and weak. They managed the forest the way a good shepherd manages a flock, not by taking all that could be taken, but by taking in the way that leaves the whole system healthier for the taking. Freyr brought this understanding into his role. When he blessed the fields of Midgard, he was not simply pouring abundance down from above. He was aligning the conditions, helping the relationship between the farmer and the field come into the balance that produced abundance naturally. This is the subtlety of his power that the old stories sometimes suggest without saying directly. He was not a giver of things. He was an aligner of conditions. When Freyr traveled from Vanaheim to Asgard as part of the exchange, when he took his place among the Asir, he brought everything with him. Not just himself, but the sensibility, the Vanir understanding of the world as a connected whole, the knowledge of abundance as a quality of relationship, the deep attentiveness to seasons and soil and the specific requirements of growing things. Asgard was magnificent. Its halls were golden and its walls were strong, and the gods who inhabited it were beings of extraordinary power and presence. But Asgard was organized around different values than the ones Freyr carried. The values of the Asir were the values of a warrior culture: strength, honor, oath-keeping, the organized collection and distribution of the honored dead. These were not wrong values. They were necessary, but they were incomplete without what Freyr brought. He walked through Asgard's halls and he noticed things. The quality of the gardens behind the Great Hall maintained in the way of gardens that are kept rather than loved. The relationship between the gods and the natural world, respectful but distant. The natural world as something to travel through rather than something to understand from the inside. He did not criticize. He simply brought what he had. And over time, the quality of Freyr's presence changed things. The gardens became more than maintained. The relationship between Asgard and the natural world became warmer. The abundance that was available to those who aligned the conditions became more abundant still. Freyr's domain was not one season. A mistake sometimes made in thinking about him is to see him as the summer god, the god of the long warm days, the full harvest, the abundance of the good year's peak. He was all of it. Every season was his in its own way. Spring was his in the specific quality of the returning sun. Not the full sun of summer, not yet. But the sun that appears after the longest winter and has the quality of something returning rather than arriving for the first time. The quality of relief in the light. The way the world leans toward it. The way the soil responds before it is even warm, already beginning to move toward what it has been doing every spring since before the first human being watched it. Freyr was in that, in the quality of the light that makes things grow. Summer was his in its fullness, the long days of the north, where the sun barely sets and the sky stays light through what should be the night hours. The quality of summer in the Norse lands was intense and brief and complete. Every day full of everything the season had to give. The plants growing so fast you could almost watch them. Freyr was in all of this. The generosity of the full summer. Autumn was his in the harvest. The completion. The gathering of what had been cultivated all summer. The specific quality of the harvest that had come in well, the satisfaction of it, the gratitude, the sense of having participated in something larger than yourself and having received what the participation offered. And winter was his even then. In the holding, the seeds in the cold soil, the roots storing what they needed, the world in its necessary rest. The peace of winter was Freyr's peace. Not the dramatic peace of battle one. The deep, settled peace of things that have done what they were going to do and are now simply resting in the fullness of what they have given. Among the gifts that came to Freyr through the long years of his life among the Asir, one was more particular to him than any other. A boar. Gullinbursti. The name means gold mane or golden bristles, the specific quality of the animal that made it not merely a boar but something else. Its bristles were gold. Not gilded. Not decorated. Not touched with gold in the way that craftsmen touch things with metal for beauty. They were gold in themselves. Each bristle the color of the sun at its most generous hour, the hour in late afternoon when everything turns warm and the world looks like the inside of something comfortable. And the gold was not merely color. It gave light. Gullinbursti moved through the darkness and the darkness moved away from it. Not dramatically, not with blazing intensity that hurt the eyes, but with the specific warmth of a lamp in a room where someone needs to see. The light it gave was working light, practical light, the light of abundance and direction. This is what Freyr had, the ability to bring the specific quality of light that allows things to be seen as they are. Not illuminated for spectacle, illuminated for recognition. Gullinbursti came from the same forge in Svartalfheim that produced so many of the Norse cosmos's greatest objects. The dwarves Brokkr and Sindri had made it, the same brothers whose work also produced Draupnir and Mjolnir, in the great contest that Loki's wager had set in motion. 3 items from one extraordinary forge session. Draupnir, the ring that multiplied itself every 9th night. Mjolnir, the hammer that always returned. And Gullinbursti, the boar of living gold. Of the 3, Gullinbursti was perhaps the most unusual. A weapon could protect. A ring could signal status and abundance. But a living animal, an animal of light and speed and the sacred quality of the boar, this was something different. It was a companion, and Freyr received it as such. They moved through the world together with the specific ease of beings that belong together. Where Freyr went, the quality of the place was warmer for Gullinbursti's light. Where Freyr's blessing was needed, the golden boar was there, the specific light of prosperity and abundance illuminating what was possible. And then there was the ship, Vanir, made by the sons of Ivaldi, 3 dwarven craftsmen of Svartalfheim, whose specific genius was the construction of impossible things. Things that should not work but did. Things that defied the ordinary logic of materials and scale. Vanir was the finest ship ever built. Large enough to carry all the gods of Asgard, with room for their weapons and provisions and the space needed for beings of that stature to be comfortable for a long journey. And small enough, when folded, to fit inside a pocket. This is the detail that tells you everything about what the sons of Ivaldi understood. They understood that the quality of a thing is not the same as its size. That the ship that can cross any sea is not necessarily the ship that takes up the most harbor space. That what something can do is more important than what it looks like doing it. Vanir also had favorable winds. Always. Wherever it needed to go, the wind came from exactly the right direction to take it there. Not the wind that happened to be blowing. The wind that was needed. This is Freyr's kind of abundance. Not the abundance of having more than you need. The abundance of having exactly what you need, when you need it in the form that serves. And then the story that is the most intimate of all Freyr's stories. The story that reveals something about him that the stories of prosperity and abundance do not quite capture. The story of Geir. Freyr was at Hliskjolf, the high seat from which all things could be seen. He was there, and the sources are honest about the fact that he should not have been there. The high seat was Odin's. It was not the kind of thing you casually occupied. But Freyr sat and looked, and what he saw changed everything. In Jotunheim, in the giant world, among the mountains and the ancient forests, he saw a woman walking. Her name was Geir. She was the daughter of a giant, one of the ancient beings whose world was the world before the gods had organized things. She was walking from her hall into the open space, and the specific quality of her presence, the quality of light that she moved through, or that seemed to move around her, was visible even from the high seat. Even across the distance of the worlds. Freyr looked at her, and something in him resolved in the way that things resolve when they find what they have been seeking without knowing they were seeking it. Not the resolution of logic. The resolution of recognition. He knew in that moment, with the certainty of something too large for argument, that this was the person he loved. He went back from the high seat with a quality that was new to him. Freyr, who brought abundance to others, was diminished. Not physically. He was the god of the summer sun, and the summer sun does not diminish easily. But something in him that had always been easy became difficult. He could not find the peace that was usually so natural to him. The quality of the summer days seemed different. The light had the same properties but not the same feeling. He had seen Geir. He had understood something from seeing her that he could not ununderstand. And Geir was in Jotunheim, a world that the gods and the giants regarded each other across with the long history of their differences. Not simply someone you went to visit. Not simply someone you sent a message to. Geir was on the other side of an enormous distance, not just physical but the distance of different worlds, different origins, different ways of being in the cosmos. He sat with this. For days, the sources suggest. The god of peace and prosperity, who brought balance and abundance to the world, could not find balance within himself. Freyr had a companion, a servant in the old sense of the word, which meant not a lesser being but a trusted one. The one who went where Freyr could not go himself, who saw what Freyr needed and moved to meet it. Skirnir. Skirnir's name is sometimes translated as the Bright One or the Shining One. He was the one who brought Freyr's light into the places where Freyr could not go directly. Freyr told him about Geir. Not easily. Not the way a god who has authority simply commands. But in the way of someone who has been carrying something heavy and has decided to share the weight. Skirnir listened. And then he agreed to go. To travel to Jotunheim and find Geir and speak for Freyr. But there was a cost. Freyr had a sword. Not any sword. His sword, the magical sword that fought on its own when wielded by a wise hand. The sword that knew how to move against the forces of chaos. The sword that was, in some mythological accounts, connected to Freyr's ability to stand in the great final conflict of Ragnarok. Skirnir asked for the sword, and Freyr agreed, without hesitation, or rather, with one specific hesitation that the old sources remember precisely. He paused. The pause of someone who understands exactly what they are giving and gives it anyway. This is the most important thing about Freyr. Not the abundance he gave. Not the prosperity he brought. But this. When something mattered enough, he gave what it cost to be given. He gave his sword for love. Skirnir traveled from Asgard into the wide world, through the borderlands between the organized and the ancient, into the territory of Jotunheim. The landscape changed as he moved further from Asgard. The roads that were maintained gave way to roads that were remembered. The trees that were familiar in the Norse heartland gave way to trees of a different quality. Older, broader, their roots more visible as though they had long since stopped bothering to keep themselves underground. The mountains of Jotunheim were not mountains in the way that Midgard had mountains. They were on a different scale. Walls of stone that rose into clouds and continued above them. The valleys between them were vast and cold even in summer. Skirnir rode through this landscape with the specific quality of someone on a mission that matters. Not urgent, purposeful. There is a difference. Urgency is driven by fear that the thing will be lost if you don't hurry. Purpose is driven by the understanding that the thing requires your full presence and that hurrying would be a form of carelessness. Skirnir moved with purpose. He found the hall of Geirmir, Geir's father, the giant in whose home she lived. The hall was guarded, surrounded by fire that burned in a ring. He rode through it, not because he was immune to fire, but because the mission required crossing, and so he crossed. He found Geir inside. The old sources give us her initial response as resistant. She was not someone who received visitors easily. Not because she was hostile, but because the giants of Jotunheim existed on their own terms. They were the ancient ones, the ones who predated the current ordering of the world. They did not need the approval of the gods, and they did not seek it. Geir had her own dignity, her own sense of what she was and what she deserved. She listened to Skirnir with the specific quality of someone who will hear what is said, but will not be simply persuaded by the saying of it. What moved her eventually, what brought her to agreement, the sources describe in ways that have been discussed for a long time. There are things promised and things threatened and things offered. But what remains after the story is the fact of what came next. Geir agreed to meet Freyr. She named the place, a sacred grove, a liminal space, the kind of space that belongs to neither the world of the gods nor the world of the giants, but to something older than both. And she named the time, 9 nights hence. 9, the Norse sacred number. The number of nights Odin hung from the world tree. The number of worlds in the great ash. The number that meant, this is complete. This is the full measure of what is required. Skirnir returned to Freyr with this. 9 nights. 9 nights for a being in love who cannot yet be with the one they love. The sources remember this with brevity. Freyr speaks a brief verse, the old sources preserve it, that has the quality of something said quietly to no one in particular. Long is 1 night. Long is a second. How shall I endure 3? This is one of the most human moments in Norse mythology. The god of patience and the long summer. The god of the seasons that turn in their own time regardless of anyone's urgency. The god who understood better than most that everything has its season and its season will come. Could not wait 9 nights. Or could, but could not find the waiting easy. This is not a contradiction. It is a completion. Freyr knew the philosophy of patience. He lived it in his role. And he was also in love, which is the one state that makes the philosophy of patience feel like something you have read rather than something you inhabit. He waited 9 nights. In the sacred grove, in the liminal space between the worlds, they met. The old stories do not dwell on this meeting. They give you the before and the after. The before, waiting, the sword given, the long 9 nights. The after, they were together. The union of the god of the summer sun and the daughter of the ancient earth. Because Geir is more than a character in a love story. She is something symbolic that the love story is built around. She is the earth in winter, cold and still and turned inward, formidable in her self-sufficiency, beautiful in her specific kind of beauty, the beauty of winter, the beauty of things that do not need the summer to be what they are. And Freyr is the summer sun, the warmth that comes after the longest night, the specific quality of light that draws the earth upward out of its cold. Their union is the union of the sun and the winter earth, which produces spring, the most awaited thing, the most beautiful thing, the renewal that the whole long winter has been building toward. When Freyr and Geir found each other in the sacred grove, they were enacting the oldest story in the northern world. The story that happened every year. The story that will happen every spring as long as there is a spring to happen. The Norse people remembered Freyr in the places he most belonged. Not in temples built of dressed stone. In groves. The sacred grove was the oldest form of Norse sacred space. a collection of trees ancient specifically with the quality of age that the very old trees have. A clearing at their center. The quality of the clearing, different from the forest. Open to the sky, bounded by the trees in a way that felt both protective and present. A room that was also outdoors. The specific quality of light in the grove was different from the quality of light in either the open field or the deep forest. Filtered, but not darkened. Green-gold in summer, amber in autumn, blue-white in winter where the sky showed through bare branches. At the center of the grove, a stone, or a post, or simply the quality of the center itself, the feeling that in this specific spot, the center of the clearing, something gathered. The farmers came to the grove at the beginning of the growing season. They brought offerings. Grain from the last year's harvest, the seed that connected this year to the previous one. The first fruits of the orchard. A libation of ale or mead, the liquid gold that grain became when transformed by the patience of fermentation. They came with gratitude for what had been, and they came with hope for what was to come. They did not ask as supplicants. They came as participants. In the relationship between the farmer and the field, between the human community and the god who aligned the conditions, both parties had responsibilities. The farmer's responsibility was to tend well, to work with the land rather than against it, to take what the land gave without taking more, to return to the land what the land needed. And Freyr's responsibility was to align the conditions, to bring the warmth in its season, to send the rain when the rain was needed, to hold the peace that allowed the work to happen. Freyr was the god of peace. This is easy to say and easy to pass over. But peace, in the Norse understanding of what Freyr gave, was not the peace of absence. Not the peace of, nothing bad is happening right now, but the peace of, everything that needs to happen is happening. The peace of a community where the relationships between people are right, where disputes are settled and oaths are kept and the energy that might have gone into conflict instead goes into the work. The work of growing, the work of building, the work of raising children and maintaining the relationships that make a community real rather than merely a collection of people who happen to be near each other. This kind of peace is not passive. It requires constant maintenance. The small adjustments that prevent small grievances from becoming large ones. The willingness to hear all sides. The willingness to give up what you want in the interest of what the community needs. Freyr modeled this. He had given his sword for Geir. He had given what his own self-interest required for the sake of love. And in giving it, he had demonstrated something. That the god of peace knew that peace costs something. That you cannot have it for free. That it requires the willingness to give something up. And that what you get in return, the warmth, the growth, the spring that follows the long winter, is worth every price that peace requires. In Midgard, the kingdoms that honored Freyr well were the kingdoms that prospered. Not because Freyr played favorites, but because honoring Freyr meant doing what Freyr represented. Tending the land with care, living in peace with neighbors, managing the forest in the way that the forest asked to be managed, fishing the waters in the way that left the waters abundant for the next generation. The old Swedish kings took the name Yngvi Freyr, the king of Freyr, because the king's job was to embody what Freyr gave. The king who was Freyr's representative on earth was not merely a military leader. The king was the one whose quality of attention to the land and the community determined whether the year was a good one, whether the harvest was abundant or thin, whether the livestock were healthy, whether the fishing was good. The kingdom under Freyr's blessing was one where the king did the king's work, not conquest but cultivation, not the expansion of territory, but the deepening of the relationship with the territory that was already theirs. The land responded to this, not magically, simply in the way that tended things always respond, by being more than they would have been without the tending. Among all the qualities that Freyr carried from Vanaheim into his life in Asgard, one of the most specific was his relationship with the beings of the living world. Not the gods, not the giants, Not the humans of Midgard, though he loved them in his way. The smaller beings. The spirits. The ones who moved through the world at the level of the specific. The spirit of the particular oak grove on a particular hillside. The being of the river bend where the water moved in a specific way that had not changed in centuries. The elves of the forest, not light elves in the grand cosmological sense, but the smaller, more local presences that the Norse people recognized in specific places they knew well. Freyr had relationships with these beings that the old stories preserve in fragments. Not the relationships of power, not the god commanding the lesser spirits. The relationships of understanding. He knew what they were. He understood what they needed. He moved through the world in a way that honored their presence rather than displacing it. The elder tree at the edge of the farm, the spirit of which was addressed carefully, not harmed without apology. The stream that moved through the meadow, the being of which was spoken to when the farmer needed to draw more water than usual. The forest at the settlement's edge, approached with respect, taken from with thanks. These small ceremonies, these daily acknowledgments of the living world's intelligence, were Freyr's domain. They were the practical expression of what he represented. The understanding that the world was not simply material for human use but a community of presences, each with its own integrity. The farmer in Midgard who honored Freyr did not honor him on specific holy days alone. They honored him in the daily work, in the specific attention they paid to the field. The morning walk along the planting rows, not an inspection in the anxious sense, but the kind of attention that tells you, simply by the quality of the ground under your feet and the color of the leaves and the specific smell of the soil, how the crops were doing. The attention that knows when rain is needed and when it is not. The attention that knows when to intervene and when to leave well enough alone. The farmer who honored Freyr was the farmer who had learned this attentiveness, who had learned to ask, what does the field need today? Rather than, what do I want from the field today? This is not a small shift. It is perhaps the most important shift in the relationship between human beings and the natural world. From, what can I take? To, what does this need? The farmer who made this shift found, reliably over time, that the field gave more than the field that was only taken from. Not magically. Simply in the way that any relationship gives more when both parties are attentive to each other's needs. This was Freyr's practical wisdom, and it was the most practical thing in the world. The sword that Freyr gave to Skirnir, and through Skirnir to the world, has been thought about for a long time. What does it mean that the god of peace gave away his magical sword for love? One answer is the obvious one. He was in love, and in love people give what they have. But the Norse mythology is rarely satisfied with the obvious answer. The magical sword, the one that fought on its own when a wise hand guided it, was connected, in the old accounts, to the capacity of Freyr to stand in the final battle. Which is to say, giving the sword for love was choosing love over the ability to protect himself. Choosing, in full knowledge of the cost, the relationship over the security. This is not recklessness. Freyr was not a reckless being. He was the god of the careful tending of conditions. But he understood something that the careful tending of conditions also eventually teaches. That you cannot protect everything. That at some point the question is not, how do I keep all of this safe? But, what is worth everything I have? And his answer was love. The union of the summer sun and the winter earth. The spring that makes the long cold meaningful. The renewal that the whole system is built toward. He gave his sword for the thing that the sword would have been protecting anyway. The abundance and the peace and the prosperity. He gave the instrument for the thing the instrument was in service of. There is a quality specific to those who have experienced genuine abundance. It is not necessarily generosity in the way of someone who has very little and gives it anyway. Although that generosity is its own kind of beautiful. It is the generosity of someone who has understood that the giving does not diminish what is given from. That abundance, unlike scarcity, is not reduced by sharing. That the field that shares its harvest with the community does not have less next year. It has more. Because the community tends it. Because the relationship between the farmer and the field, maintained through the giving and the receiving, deepens. Because abundance is not a quantity. It is a quality of relationship. And relationships deepen through generosity. Freyr gave freely. The warmth of the sun, not rationed, not given more to the field that pleased him and less to the field that did not. Given to everything. The whole landscape received what it received from Freyr without condition. This is what made him what he was. Not selective abundance. Generosity as a quality of being. In Álfheimr, the summer had a quality it had nowhere else. Not hotter, not brighter, more complete. The light elves moved through the realm in their long accustomed ways, and the quality of their movement was the quality of things that have found their right relationship with where they are. Every tree in Álfheimr was known. Every meadow had its name in the light elves' language, not the names that appear on maps, but the names that come from intimate familiarity. The meadow where the gentians were thickest. The slope where the wildflowers came earliest in the spring. The old clearing where the deer came at dawn. Freyr moved through Álfheimr at the height of summer with a quality that matched the quality of the realm. He was the sun. And this was the place that the sun made most fully alive. He rode Gullinbursti through the long light evenings, the golden boar's bristles adding their own warmth to the sun's warmth, the path through the meadow lit by both at once. The light elves came to the path's edges as he passed. Not in obeisance. In greeting. The greeting of beings who know each other and are glad of the knowing. Freyr returned the greeting in the specific way of someone who was completely present in each moment of it. Not the wave from a distance that says, "I have acknowledged you," but the full pause, the meeting of eyes, the specific recognition of this particular being in this particular moment. Every being he passed was fully seen in the passing. This is his gift. Not just the warmth and the abundance, the seeing, the fullness of attention that says, "You are real, and I am glad of you." Peace, as Freyr understood it, was not an absence. It was a presence. The presence of the conditions that allow everything to do what it does best. The field at peace is not a field where nothing happens. It is a field where what needs to happen is happening without interference. The rain falls. The sun reaches the soil. The roots find their depth. The grain pushes upward and outward. The insects do their work. The birds do their work. The farmer does their work. All of it happening in the specific harmony that the Norse people called peace. Not the forced peace of one side having conquered the other. The dynamic peace of everything in its right relationship. This is the peace that Freyr gave when he gave it. And it was the most valuable thing in the Norse world. More valuable than any individual battle won. More valuable than any conquest. Because what you win in a battle is a moment. What peace gives is a season. And a good season gives what all the wealth in any hall cannot. The grain in the storehouse. The livestock in the pen. The fire warm. The family fed. The community together. The old stories place Freyr in the great final conflict. At Ragnarok, when the age completes itself and the great forces meet, the gods, the giants, the wolf and the serpent and the fire, Freyr fights. Without his sword. He gave his sword, remember. He gave it for Geir. For love. For the spring that follows the winter. He fights at Ragnarok with a stag's antler, with what is available, with what the moment gives. And the old sources give us this detail with a specific brevity that contains more than many longer passages. He is not lesser for the lack of the sword. He is more completely himself. The God of peace who chose love over the instrument of war. Fighting at the end with what remained. Not abandoning the fight. Not pretending that peace means never standing in the face of what would end what you love. But standing in the face of it with the specific resources of what you actually are. Not what you wish you had. What you are. This is one of the most complete images in Norse mythology. Freyr at Ragnarok with his antler. every other warrior with their weapons, and Freyr with what he had, which was what he had chosen, which was what love had cost him, which was what the spring had been worth. The Norse stories end past Ragnarok. The earth rises from the water. Green. The word is always green. The new earth, the renewed world, the world that comes after the great ending, it is green. The color of growing things. The color of Freyr's domain in its first expression. The crops will grow without planting. The old sources say this with the specificity of something that has been thought about carefully. Not, the crops might grow. Not, the crops will grow with effort. The crops will grow without planting. The abundance that was always available, that was always the natural property of the world when the conditions were right, that abundance will be available freely. Without the labor of the long cultivation. Without the anxiety of the uncertain harvest. Simply available. The way Freyr always understood it could be. When everything was in its right relationship. When the world was in the peace that made growing natural rather than effortful. This new world, this green, planting-free world of natural abundance, is the world that Freyr always represented. The world as it could be, as it sometimes was, as it will be again. In Álfheimr, the evening has come. The sun that has been generous all day is descending toward the horizon without haste. The light that it makes as it descends, the specific quality of late afternoon light, when the sun is low enough that it lights things from the side rather than from above, is doing what it does. It is making the ordinary beautiful. The grasses of the meadow catch the side light and glow. The trees at the meadow's edge take on the warmth of the angle and become something slightly other than they were in the direct noon light. The stream that moves through the meadow reflects the low sun in long bright lines that shift as the water shifts. The light elves have moved toward their evening activities, some still in the forest, some in their halls, some simply sitting in the meadow with the quality of beings who have found their right relationship with exactly where they are. Gullinbursti is somewhere in the meadow, his gold bristles catching the sun's gold and holding it in the way of the specific object that was made to hold it. And Freyr is at the meadow's edge, watching the sun descend, not with urgency, not with sadness at the day's ending, with the quality of someone who has understood the cycle deeply enough to know that the descending sun is not leaving. It is completing. The day has done what the day does. The field has received what it was given. The light elves have done their part. The summer is full. And the descending sun is not diminishment. It is the beautiful close of what has been given completely. In the fields of Midgard, in every year that was good, in every year that the rains came at the right time and the sun stayed long enough and the frost held back until the harvest was in, Freyr was there. Not visible, present, in the specific quality of the warmth, in the exact weight of the grain when you held it in your hand and felt that it was full, in the quality of the afternoon in the orchard when the fruit was ripe and the smell of it was so complete that you stood still just to be in it, in the peace of the village at harvest's end, when the work was done and the stores were in and the community gathered around the fire with the specific quality of people who have done what needed doing and find themselves in the good space on the other side of it. In the spring, every spring, when the ground softened and the first shoots appeared and the world did what it always does after the long winter, renewed itself, without drama, without announcement, simply returning to what it was always going to return to, the green of the new growth, the warmth of the sun that had never really left, the abundance that was always available to those who had maintained the right relationship with the world that gave it. This is Freyr's legacy, not a monument, not a story with a single dramatic peak. The accumulated abundance of all the years, the harvests and the springs and the peaceful seasons, the relationship between the farmer and the field, between the community and the land, between the human world and the living world that holds it. There is a quality of light that photographers and painters call the golden hour. The hour just before sunset, when the sun is low and the light is warm and everything it touches becomes more fully itself than it was in the harsher light of the day. Shadows grow long and soft. Colors deepen into their truest expression. The world becomes, for this brief period, the world at its most beautiful. This quality is not manufactured. It is simply available to those who are there for it. Freyr's domain is the golden hour made permanent. Not the glare of noon or the dark of night. The specific, warm, side-lit quality of the world at its most beautiful. The quality that makes the ordinary extraordinary. That makes the field of grain at the end of summer look like something that was designed to be beautiful rather than something that simply grew because the conditions were right. But of course it was designed to be beautiful. The field of grain at the end of summer is exactly what happens when the conditions are right. And the conditions being right is exactly Freyr's work. Let the golden hour settle over you now. The warmth of it. Not hot, not the direct, slightly aggressive warmth of the noon sun. The warm of late afternoon. The warm that says, the work of the day is done. You can receive what the day has given now. You don't have to do anything more. Let the meadow be what it is. The grasses moving slightly in a wind so gentle it barely deserves the name. The wildflowers with their heads turned toward the low sun. The stream moving through the meadow with the quiet purposefulness of water that knows where it is going and is in no hurry to get there. Let Álfheimr be around you in its completeness. The light elves in their evening ease. The forest at the meadow's edge holding the quality of the day in its canopy, releasing it slowly as the shadows deepen. Somewhere, Gullinbursti in the long grass, his golden bristles like a small warm sun of their own. And the actual sun descending slowly, so slowly, in the way of the summer sun in the north, which does not hurry its setting, which gives the evening every minute it can spare, which understands, as Freyr understands, that the light is a gift and that gifts should be given fully and not hurried toward their end. The crops are in. The harvest is complete. The stores are full. The peace holds. The community is gathered. The fire is lit against the coming dark. And the dark, when it comes, will come gently, because the world is held by the one who aligned the conditions, by the god of the summer sun and the full harvest and the peace that made everything possible, by Freyr, who is in the warmth on your skin, in the quality of the air that has been holding sunshine all day, in the abundance of everything that has been given freely and received with gratitude. Sleep now. The year has been good. The harvest is in. The world is exactly as abundant as it was always going to be when the conditions were right. And the conditions are right. They have always been right. They will always be right. In the world that Freyr tends. In the golden hour that does not end.